In the deep silence of the earth, beneath layers of stone and time, the remains of ancient lives still whisper their stories. Fossils are more than bones turned to stone. They are moments of death, frozen forever. Every fracture, every posture, every grain of dust that clings to a skull holds a trace of how a life ended. Most of those deaths were simple, ordinary, the quiet end of a natural life. But a few are different. A few fossils tell stories that feel unnatural, twisted, and impossible. These are the bizarre deaths that haunt archaeology, seen so strange they make scientists question what really happened in the dark corners of prehistory. The first of these stories begins in the rolling hills of northern Italy, where a discovery stunned researchers. A human-like skeleton, curled awkwardly, its spine arched, mouth open as if frozen mid-scream. The body was not lying flat. It was twisted, bent at the waist, arms raised above its head in a posture of torment. For months, scientists debated what had happened. Some thought the contorted pose came from the soil's pressure over thousands of years. But others saw something else, evidence of a violent death, of a body trapped alive beneath volcanic ash. It was found near the site of an ancient eruption that buried entire valleys. The layers of ash dated back almost 30,000 years. Whoever this person was, they likely never saw the fire coming. The eruption swallowed everything, sealing their final moment in stone. Elsewhere in the cold north, another fossil tells a story of a slower, more merciless death. In the melting ice of the Alps, a body emerged, not just bone, but flesh, hair, and clothing still preserved. This was Ötzi, the Iceman, a prehistoric traveler who died over 5,000 years ago. His death seemed peaceful at first, lying face down, as if he had fallen asleep. But under careful examination, the truth began to unfold. An arrowhead was lodged deep in his shoulder. Cuts on his hands showed signs of a struggle. His last meal still rested in his stomach. Dried meat, herbs, and grain. He had been hunted, ambushed, and left to die in the freezing wind. The ice had kept his killer's secret for millennia. Forensic studies revealed traces of blood from multiple individuals on his weapons. Perhaps he had killed before being killed himself. His death was not a simple tragedy. It was a prehistoric murder, now frozen in eternal evidence. But not every bizarre death leaves clues of violence. Some fossils show scenes that defy logic. Bodies arranged in postures no natural death could create. In a cave in Eastern Europe, archaeologists uncovered the remains of several individuals buried together. Their skulls faced inward, arranged in a circle, while their limbs were intertwined in complex patterns. It was not a random collapse of bones. It was intentional. The soil around them contained burnt stones and traces of ochre pigment, the ancient world symbol of blood and life. This was ritual. But what kind? Were these people victims of sacrifice, or participants in some forgotten ceremony of transformation? Theories range from spiritual rebirth to cannibalistic initiation. Whatever the truth, their final rest was carefully staged, a dark performance carved into the earth. Sometimes fossils speak of terror in subtler ways. In the deserts of China's Darien Basin, dozens of bodies were found buried in boat-shaped coffins, surrounded by masks made of wood and wool. The dry sand had preserved them perfectly. Their faces were peaceful, but their positioning was not. Some lay with hands clutching their throats, others with arms reaching upward. Traces of plant toxins were found in their stomachs, suggesting they may have been poisoned, perhaps willingly, perhaps not. These were people of a lost culture, whose rituals mixed death with art. Their strange graves seemed to tell a story of a community that saw dying not as an end, but as a passage, one that required beauty, and pain, and theater. Then there are the fossils that reveal death by nature itself, brutal, random, and without mercy. In a pit in Spain, known as Cima de los Huesos, the pit of bones, thousands of fossil fragments from early humans were discovered. Many skulls showed signs of trauma, deep fractures that came before death. But the pit was not a battlefield. It was too deep, too remote. Some scientists believe these were deliberate deposits, the first signs of funerary behavior. Others think it was a trap where unsuspecting individuals fell to their deaths over centuries. Yet among those bones lies one skull with a hole in the forehead, matching the force of a heavy blow. If that wound was intentional, it could be one of the earliest murders in human history. A single act of violence, preserved across hundreds of millennia. Not all fossils belong to humans, yet their deaths reflect our own fragility. In a vast plain in Siberia, explorers unearthed the frozen remains of mammoths, horses, and wolves tangled together in ice. One mammoth still stood upright, its trunk curled toward its mouth, as if gasping for air. Scientists believe it fell into a pit of permafrost and froze alive, trapped standing as the cold deepened around it. The image is haunting, a frozen monument to helplessness. These scenes of death in the animal world remind us that extinction and survival have always danced together. But some fossils seem almost cursed, their deaths too strange to explain with reason. In one site in South America, paleontologists found two prehistoric humans, a man and a child, buried side by side. Their bones showed no injuries, no signs of disease. Yet their skeletons were coated with a shimmering black substance. At first, it was thought to be natural mineralization. Later tests revealed it was not. The coating was made of charcoal, ash, and animal fat, deliberately applied before burial. It was a ritual preparation, perhaps to protect the dead from evil spirits. But the question remains, what happened to them before this ritual? Were they victims of a plague, or of human fear? Every discovery opens another mystery. Why were so many fossils found with limbs folded tightly to the chest, as if trying to protect themselves? Why do so many mouths gape open, as if caught in a final breath of terror? Some scientists say it's simply rigor mortis, the muscles tightening after death. But others, especially those who study ancient rituals, see something deeper. That prehistoric humans may have intentionally posed their dead, shaping them into symbols of pain, rebirth, or worship. In a cave in France, a fossilized skeleton lies beneath layers of red ochre. Its body is surrounded by animal bones, arranged in a circle. Wolf, deer, and bird remains intertwined. The ochre was carefully sprinkled, as if painting the body with the color of blood. To the prehistoric mind, red was life, energy, and sacrifice. This burial suggests the person may have been revered or offered. Perhaps they were a shaman, or perhaps they were a victim chosen to ensure the tribe's survival through winter. The truth is lost, but the symbolism remains clear. Death was not just an ending. It was a dialogue between the living and the spirits. Sometimes, even nature seems to preserve these scenes with intention. In volcanic ash fields of Tanzania, a group of footprints tells the story of a tragedy. They belong to a family, adults and children, walking across soft ground moments before a sudden eruption. The prints stop abruptly, as if time itself halted. Layers of ash buried their path, and beneath that ash, the remains of their bodies were found. They didn't just vanish. They became part of the Earth's memory. Those silent steps remind us that death in prehistory was not always isolated. Sometimes, entire communities disappeared in a single heartbeat. They're fossils that show us panic, fear, and attempts at escape. A mother's arms reaching for a child, a hunter trying to shield his face. In the caves of South Africa, ancient hominin fossils were discovered deep within narrow tunnels where no light could reach. How they ended up there puzzled scientists. Some suggested they were dragged in by predators, but others found no bite marks, no signs of struggle. One theory now stands out. These early humans may have placed their dead there deliberately. If true, it means that the idea of burial, of caring for the dead, existed long before modern humans. It suggests that even our distant ancestors, living in darkness, already feared and respected death. Across continents, the story repeats. Fossils found in caves, pits, ice, and mud, each one holding a frozen secret. Some are accidents of geology. Some are messages from the past, carefully constructed to be remembered. And some remain inexplicable, even with all our science and reason. As centuries turned into millennia, and millennia into epochs, the ground kept its secrets. For every fossil that reveals the manner of death, there are countless others that hide the cause forever. Yet, the more we uncover, the clearer it becomes that these deaths were not random. Each strange position, each layer of pigment, each mark on bone points towards something deeper, an ancient relationship between death, belief, and identity. In the prehistoric world, death was not a quiet event. It was a passage, and passages required rituals. Fossils show that early humans were not merely victims of nature. They were interpreters of it. They saw storms, fire, disease, and hunger not as accidents, but as the will of unseen forces. Death, then, was an act of communication. When a hunter fell in battle, his tribe might place his body facing east, toward the rising sun, to symbolize his rebirth. When a mother died in childbirth, she might be buried with the child's bones placed gently on her chest, a symbolic union meant to continue in the spirit world. But the bizarre deaths, those that still make archaeologists uneasy, seem to come from moments when that communication broke down, when fear overcame understanding. In a cave in the Caucasus Mountains, scientists discovered the remains of a young woman whose skull had been pierced repeatedly with sharp stones. Around her lay fragments of animal bones and human teeth. Chemical tests reveal high levels of hallucinogenic plant residue nearby. This was not ordinary violence, it was ceremony. Perhaps she was a shaman, a conduit between the human world and the unknown, sacrificed to open a door to the spirits. Or perhaps she was a scapegoat, a victim of a tribe desperate to end famine or disease. Her death is frozen in mystery, a silent echo of terror and faith interwoven. Not far from there, in the frozen steppes of Siberia, another body was found. A child, wrapped in furs, buried beneath a carved mask. The mask's expression was serene, its eyes closed. But when the remains were examined, researchers found that the child's body had been intentionally bound before burial, the arms tied across the chest with leather straps. The bindings were not meant to restrain the living. They were meant to control the dead. Some ancient tribes believed the spirits of the young could wander after death, bringing misfortune. By binding the body, they believed they were keeping the spirit still, ensuring peace for the living. What appears to us as cruelty may have been, to them, protection. The most haunting of all fossil discoveries are those that seem to capture the moment of death itself. In a desert plain in Kazakhstan, two skeletons were found locked together, their arms entwined, their skulls facing each other. They were buried beneath layers of fine dust, not by human hands, but by a sudden sandstorm thousands of years ago. Their bones show no struggle, no wounds. It is likely they died embracing, overwhelmed by the storm. Their strange preservation, a moment of human connection frozen by chance, feels more like a painting than a tragedy. Yet even in that beauty, there is unease. Were they lovers, siblings, or strangers who found each other in panic as the world turned to dust? The earth offers no answers, only silence. Archaeologists have found dozens of fossils that seem to share one recurring theme: the arched body, the open mouth, the frozen reach. For decades, it was assumed this death pose came from muscle contractions as bodies dried out in the heat. But new research suggests something else. In certain prehistoric burials, the posture was deliberately created. The spine bent, the mouth pried open, the limbs arranged. Why? Perhaps to symbolize rebirth, a body curled like a fetus returning to the womb of the earth. Or perhaps, more darkly, it was a gesture of offering. The dead presented in agony to satisfy the gods of stone and storm. This blending of pain and reverence runs deep through human history. We're the only species that buries its dead with ceremony. Even our distant ancestors, the Neanderthals, placed flowers in graves and arranged bones in patterns. That behavior, preserved in fossil evidence, marks the beginning of something extraordinary: awareness of death. Once humans realized they would die, they began to shape the meaning of dying. And with that awareness came fear. The bizarre deaths, then, might not be coincidences. They may be the visible traces of that fear, a record of early humans trying to control what they could not understand. They painted their dead with ochre to imitate blood, hoping to give life after death. They buried the fallen with tools and weapons, so the spirit would not wander empty-handed. They bound corpses, sacrificed animals, and performed rituals, not because they loved violence, but because they loved life and could not bear to lose it. Even nature seemed to participate in that dialogue. The fossils found in ice, ash, and stone are more than geological accidents. They are reminders that death itself shaped evolution. Only those who feared death learned to protect themselves, to build shelters, to avoid danger. Fear became adaptation, and adaptation became survival. Every fossil of a life cut short pushed the next generation to live longer, wiser, and stronger. The bizarre deaths are, in a strange way, the reason we are here at all. Still, some discoveries refuse to fit into science or logic. In South Africa, a fossil chamber deep underground was found sealed with a smooth layer of rock. Inside were dozens of skeletons, each deliberately placed. The space was too narrow to enter easily, suggesting that the dead were carried there intentionally. These were not modern humans, but a different species, homonality. The realization shocked scientists. Creatures once thought too primitive for complex thought had performed ritual burials. Death, it seems, had meaning long before language. When we look into the hollow eyes of those fossils, we are not just looking at bones. We are looking into the mirror of our own beginnings. The terror of death, the need to explain it, and the desperate urge to preserve memory. These instincts have been with us since the dawn of consciousness. Every twisted skeleton, every circle of skulls, every body frozen in volcanic ash tells the same story, that we have always lived in the shadow of the unknown. There's something almost poetic about how time preserves these moments. The mother reaching for a child, the man turning away from fire, the tribe gathered around a dying shaman, scenes buried for ages, now revealed under a scientist's brush. We give them names, theories, and dates, but in truth, we can never truly know them. We can only imagine what they saw, what they felt, what they feared. And perhaps that is the real purpose of these fossils, not just to teach us how they died, but to remind us what it means to live. To live, knowing death is always near. To love, knowing loss is certain. To create rituals, art, and meaning, because without them, we are only bones waiting to be found. In the end, the most bizarre thing about these ancient deaths is not how strange they look, but how familiar they feel. The fear in their poses, the tenderness in their burials, the hope in their rituals, all of it echoes within us. The prehistoric human, who laid down in the cave thousands of years ago, was not so different from us. They too feared the dark, mourned the dead, and looked for signs in the stars. And when the world finally covered them, with ash, with ice, with stone, it was as if the earth itself agreed to remember. Every fossil, every twisted skeleton, every face turned upward toward nothingness became a silent monument to the story of our species. A story not only of survival, but of understanding. Because hidden inside every bizarre death is the same haunting truth, that to be human is to seek meaning, even in the face of extinction. And as long as those fossils remain, buried beneath the quiet ground, they will continue to speak to us, reminding us that life and death have always been intertwined, and that, perhaps, they always will be.